I've spent the last decade working at startups that have worked both in person as well as been remote first. In this video, we're going to dig into specifically the context of working remotely for smaller startups under 100 people to help you determine whether or not it's the right fit for you. Stay until the end for 2 questions that you can ask yourself to help you figure this out for yourself. Hey, I'm Will, and if you're new to my corner of the internet, I teach you something in sales, digital marketing, and entrepreneurship every single week to take you from zero to self-starter. First, let's talk about some of the pros of working remotely for a startup. One of the biggest benefits for working remotely for a startup is that you're generally going to have a more intimate feel to your team. Because startups are smaller, you will generally get to know people a little bit better than you would if you were working for a publicly traded company, for example. Something I've really enjoyed over the last decade of working for companies less than 100 people is that I've gotten to know a lot of my coworkers. In many cases, the majority, if not all of my coworkers. And this is something that you simply won't get at a larger company. If you watch my recent video on what it's like to work remotely in tech, you know that one of the cons I talked about in working remotely is that you don't get to know your coworkers as much. But that's even more true when you work for a larger company. I've had friends who have worked at mega corporations who have shared that over the last year working remotely, it's been really tough for them to get to know their coworkers or to really care because of just how big the team is. There's simply too many people to have to get to know at an intimate level. The second big pro of working remotely for a startup is openness to new ideas. Startups are generally going to be way more open-minded in terms of trying something new whenever you feel like something has gone stale or you just want to shake things up a little bit. For example, in the case of my current company, if we wanted to change a meeting format and just try to test things out, we would immediately be able to implement that in our next sprint or our next bi-weekly meeting. As opposed to in a mega corporation or a bigger company, you might have to go through a few different iterations of actually pitching your idea before putting it into action in the actual test. Startups that have generally shifted towards supporting remote first work have focused a lot on being open to iterating and continuing to iterate and taking this sort of Kaizen continuous improvement approach. This is something that's really great because it means that your work experience is going to continue to get better and better over time. The third pro of working remotely for a startup is that I'd say that they tend to have more team-first mentalities. Obviously, your mileage may vary here, but what I have personally found is that a lot of startups do care a lot about finding work-life integration or work-life balance for their employees, more so than potentially larger companies. Startups have often led the pack when it comes to answering questions around how to make work sustainable, especially in a remote world. For example, if you were to go through AngelList for some job listings, you'd notice that a ton of startups are proponents of giving work from home stipends for you to set up your office, as well as wellness stipends and things like that to subsidize your at-home gym, and other things that just help you have a good, sustainable work-life balance. Typically, the traditional corporate approach to this is to give you something that feels, well, a little bit more corporate. They'll tend to give you something like an at-home tumbler that you can use for your coffee, but it's nothing that really focuses on improving the employee experience. Now, I make a jab here on corporate, but that's not to say that startups aren't prone to also going down their swag rabbit holes. It's just to say that they do focus a lot more time in thinking about how to make work intentional and sustainable for their employees. Now that we covered some of the good parts of working remotely for a startup, let's shift gears to talk about some of the downsides to working remotely for a startup. For this section, I'm going to first talk about it from the lens of the differences of working remotely for a startup in person as opposed to working for a startup remotely. The first thing that I tell you is that you're going to generally have less organic team bonding. It's just much harder to have team-based events when you're in a remote world as opposed to an in-person world. Oftentimes in the pre-global situation world, I would grab dinner with my team members, or we would go for axe throwing or sporting games, and it would just be a variety of different experiences that we could have together in person. In a remote first company, you simply are not going to get those same experiences. You might have a quarterly or biannual or annual offsite or retreat, but it's simply not the same as having like a bi-weekly or monthly team event that you would have in an in-person experience. The other thing that I'd say is a drawback for some people when it comes to working remotely is that you're going to tend to have less office chatter as well as cross-team interactions. Whether you like it or not, there's always going to be some level of gossip in any company. And so if you're a fan of having some tea about your coworkers and things like that, you're not going to have nearly as much of that in a remote world. But aside from even the gossip side of things, you're also going to have fewer interactions where if, for example, you're on the sales team, you could talk to a software engineer and learn more about the work that they're doing. or just get to know them on a personal level and hang out because the two of you guys vibe together. When you work for a startup where you can go in person and see each other face to face, there are tons of opportunities throughout the day in which you guys can just take breaks together or talk about different things that you might not otherwise get to talk to in the remote environment. The reason why I think this is a big drawback in general is because these little micro interactions that you have throughout the day become really big parts of your startup experience. It's how you feel connected to your team overall, as well as your company and its mission. And so you have to be a lot more intentional about this when you are looking at things from a remote first situation. And that naturally leads me to the third point I'd bring up, which is that it's a lot tougher to connect with your company. In my opinion, there really is something special about working side by side in the trenches in a small startup in person. I think it's for that reason that for so many years, Y Combinator has encouraged and promoted their startups going to the Bay Area for the duration of their time in Y Combinator. Is simply because they get that in-person time both when they're working as well as outside of work to get to know each other and really fight for each other as a team. As with anything, the more time that you naturally spend with one another, the more connected as well as harder that you guys will work for each other. This is something that I really miss when I think back at my last company that I co-founded, in which we would spend hours working in the same 10 by 10 office space before leveling up our offices and continuing to grow the team and just spend time together that we otherwise wouldn't spend in a remote world. Now I want to share with you 2 questions that you can ask yourself when figuring out whether or not working remotely for a startup is right for you. The first question that I'd ask yourself is, what is your #1 reason for wanting to work at a startup? In the case where your answer goes something along the lines of you think that it'd be a little bit less corporate and the people would be more fun to hang out with, then you might want to actually explore more in-person opportunities than a remote first company. If it's the case where you're looking for more flexibility in your life, as well as finding a company that you align well with, then that could be a situation in which a remote first company would be a good fit. The second question I'd ask yourself is, choosing between flexibility and connections, which one is more important to you? In the case where connections are more important to you, I really would encourage you to have an in-person startup experience first before you explore the remote first world. The reason why is just because you're going to get to know your coworkers a lot better in this in-person environment. However, in the case where you really care a lot about your flexibility, you want to have some sort of alternative schedule and things like that, then a remote first company could be great for you for those purposes. Even today, I still talk to more of my old in-person startup coworkers than I do with my remote first coworkers, simply because I know them more on a personal level. If you made it this far into this video, you are the real MVP. Get your blue thumbs up trophy by hitting that like button below. And also consider subscribing if you want more tech and entrepreneurship content delivered to you to take you from zero to self-starter. Here are some videos that YouTube thinks you might like, and I look forward to chatting with you in the comments below.